We're live, people. Oneness talking point. Trump. And no, I didn't want to have this conversation. It wasn't something that my intellect jumped up and said, hey, let's talk about this in all matter of politics and fairness, because that's going to feel fabulous. I hate talking about this stuff. It's like the oneness exists until politics comes into it, or someone mentions a word like Trump, and then all of a sudden the oneness goes out the window and we've got this babbling tower of Mary, Mary, quite contrary, and there's a whole heap of he said, she said, it won't work, this system is. And at the same time, I recognize that on purpose. I recognize the purpose of the animosity and the aggression and the opposition and the conversations that people have. I just recognize them differently. I don't recognize them as solid entities, as fixed points, as ping pong balls bouncing off one another. I don't recognize them as powerful, cathartic invitations of change, even though I understand and honor that that's how some people welcome them and how they're already on purpose for that person's experience. It's not to say that they're wrong, or even that they're right, or even that there's another better way of understanding it where there's less suffering. It's got nothing to do with comparison or a truth unknown or a lifting of the veil or a path to enlightenment or a way of being with it that doesn't cause suffering. It's got nothing to do with any of those things. It's just got to do with what I'm asked to speak about in this moment, that it's all a now process. I mean, I guess I can talk about how I came to understand that. You know, investigations into politics and history and fairness and culture and medicine, you know, and how that never seemed to end anywhere. For me, researching those things just bled into the next topic, into the next field of expertise. There was no conclusion, there was no barrier, there was no point at which an assessment could be made about the dissemination of food or the control of the media or any of those things. The politics of reality bleed into one another, into this single field. There's no way for me to understand or investigate one question and not end up at the same answer, which is what is, or life is, you know, or oneness, or however you want to spirit manifest, whatever the last answer is, which is not a conclusion or a truth or a sense of what's real in opposition to anything else. It's just the way that it makes sense to me. It's the places that I'm led. It's the invitation that I'm granted in the purpose that I've been given as an equal and essential dynamic of all that is. That's how this makes sense to me. That's how experience makes sense to me, regardless of what it is, you know, or what it seems to be when we talk about it, including all of the suffering involved like there's a temptation sometimes to look at these things and go, you bring your suffering with you, or on the other side of that is the scenario triggers a suffering. The way I understand it is all of those things are involved. All of those things are part of the oneness, rather than the trigger, which is the ping pong effect, or the you bring your suffering, which is the I have control, which is still a separateness. I understand all of those stories, all of those experiences, all of those wonderings and wantings and not wantings as already on purpose. And I had a conversation recently with a very close friend of mine who went to do some training, some energy work training. And as we were talking about it, she said the teacher had an ability to feel the full spectrum of the human emotions that were attached to this mode of healing. And she, as the student, could definitely feel one or two or three, and assumed that was because she'd only just encountered it and the teacher had been doing it for so long that perhaps, over time she would learn to tune to all of the frequencies. And the first thing that came to me was, but the few that you are attuned to are a perfect match to what you do. This friend of mine, brings joy, the frequency of joy. And the emotions that she could sense immediately within the whole spectrum were a perfect match to joy, were the things that you would bring joy to. And so for me, the story of what she couldn't tune to wasn't about an incapacity that she would learn over time. It was more a significance. It was more about what she could tune to as significance. So the few emotions that instantly made sense to her were a perfect match to what she's here to do. And so the things that she could tune to were perfect for her purpose. And the things that she felt she couldn't tune to were also perfect for her purpose, because they were still available. And it's not that she needed to abandon them and never learn how to hear them or whatever it is. It was just that in order to understand that story as a perfection, it's about what you are doing. It's about what is happening that allows you to have that same experience of being the student in the classroom where the teacher can see everything and you can only see two, and still understand that as wholeness, still understand that as perfection, still understand that as an ability rather than an incapacity or an inability. And I think the same thing is true of politics, of all of the places that we exist, parenting, etc. It's the things we are doing and the things we can see and feel that are significant to our purpose. And we have some questions. Okay, Miss Becca, hello there. I love you. Miss Becca says, sometimes I feel like Trump is like the yucky uncle. You cannot stand him, but somehow you still love him. And sometimes I feel like he is an awesome mirror to reflect the worst bits of me. And it is up to me if I love those beasts in him or not. Miss Becca, that reminds me of something. I was watching something on Netflix the other day, and there's a character that's demonized as, the baddie in this show. And the thing that came to me was that there are people in his life that love him, and so they must look at him in a particular way and see what's lovable. And the same person has other people in his life that look at him and see what's unlovable. So is it really the person, or is it what's available for us to perceive in that person that makes them lovable and unlovable? I wonder if that's relevant to anyone's experience. Not just with Trump, but with those characters that play the yucky uncle, as you say. Okay, and next. Ultimately, to me, Trump reflects my personal opportunity to show up how I am going to show up in the world. How am I going to show up in the world? He is not responsible for my welfare. I am. And in turn, if I choose to be a part of community, how my community is, no matter what. And that is a miracle. Yeah, so you're kind of taking back the responsibility for what it is that you're doing rather than living in reflection or reaction to the myth of him, because it's really the myth of him. If you look at politics, there's no one person that makes decisions about what's going on. There's no one decision that can be made that doesn't involve a whole lot of other stuff. So this myth of attaching power and powerlessness to one entity, even if that entity is a position of power rather than the person themselves, is this very strange story about how we think the world works. Because it's not like being a CEO, and even being a CEO, you don't get to make all of the decisions. There are other things involved. There is an alchemy. You're part of it, and you can bluster and, present in a particular way. Sorry, there's so many stories coming in I'm trying to pay attention to all of them and, file them in a way that's going to make it easier to reiterate what's being told to me. It's like, okay, so one kid can have nothing, the family that has nothing and doesn't value education, and they study on the roof with their exercise book in their ratty clothes, and they don't get enough food, and, that motivates them to learn and go to school and go through that avenue of social success, or whatever you want to call it. And then there's another kid that needs love and attention and no conflict, and can't be around TVs and can't be around hostility, and in order for them to flourish, as we socially label that experience. So how can we say that one way of being is going to have the same effect or impact on everyone when we experience in our everyday lives the differences, the variety of ways that people respond and need and communicate with each other what they need and what they like and what they don't like, and the so-called levels of deceit and honesty, and all of our own biases that we bring into that when we look at someone and say, oh, they're lying because they want more power. It's like, well, if you accepted them completely as divine, you would tell a very different story about what it is that they're doing. If you accepted them as equal, an equal and essential dynamic of the divine, you would tell a very different story about what's going on. You may still have your assessment, but your assessment would be about you. Your assessment wouldn't be a truth about them. And I'm just saying this generally. I'm not saying this to anyone in particular. This is just something to chew on, something to ponder that takes us into a place that we didn't know existed around this story and myth of Trump. Okay, next, Mick Becker. To me, he is lovable, as hopefully, due to his presence, he is igniting self-responsibility. I would just add, due to his presence in our preconception of what that means. So because that sense of responsibility must come back to, well, it's my preconception that he is XYZ. It's my preconception that his office is XYZ. That's where responsibility comes in. And if it's not, that's fine. Like, I don't have any issue with people that want to blame, shame, and control. If that's the way that you are, then that's the way you are. And as far as I'm concerned, that's equally valuable. That's equally sacred. You're already on purpose. In blame, shame, and control, if that's how you operate, you're already on purpose. I don't have any better way for you to be. I don't have any advice about becoming something else, because I completely honor whatever it is that makes sense to you. Okay, next. Wow, Miss Becky, you're really going for it here. It's great. Each to his own journey in the best way they can, and to what degree one feels drawn to help that one. Each person is a light, and their life experience is a prism through which we see or choose to be in the world. And this makes a beautiful light show, as each person is different. Yeah, so we all tell different stories about how it fits together. And the story of how it fits together is on purpose. It gives us a sense of identity. It gives us a place in wholeness. It gives us rules and principles and means of understanding why we feel the way we do, or why things look the way they look. I think the investigation into the story that makes sense to us is probably the most intriguing of all. It's what I'm most curious about with people, when they come for sessions about things they call problems or hopes and dreams and projects, etc. I think the story of how things make sense to you is fascinating. It's it's like an ethnographer that discovers another planet, not just another tribe on this one, but it feels like another planet, another reality altogether. Because for me, our sense of cosmology is unique. Each of us has our own sense of cosmology, and the investigation into that is fun and amazing. And inspiring and, I don't know, much more interesting to me than any other conversation. I guess because that's my purpose, is to have those conversations about what is your cosmology. And in order to not bring any of my own, I need to see it as a completely different planet. That's how it works for me. Oh, Miss Becca, she's saying how much she loves me. Love your brilliant brain and loving presence. I think if you met Miss Becca, you would love, she has this amazing way of storytelling. Just listening to her voice, even if it's not the beginning, middle, end story, just listening to Miss Becca talk is one of my favorite things to do. There's some people that you hear their, I don't even know if it's their voice that does it. Who knows? In the mystery of all that is, there's so much going on. It's impossible for us to truly understand what it is that we're responding to. But I love you, Miss Becca. I love all of the ways that you are in the world, and I feel so honored to be part of your reality. And I know that, for a lot of people, not just in America, but across the planet, the idea of Trump having power is very distressing. And I think in the oneness perspective, the question is very much about what are we really upset about when someone disagrees with us? If we sat with that for a while, how would that make sense? If we asked ourselves, what if it wasn't about anyone else? What would that upset be? And then, just like in the story with the friend of mine who did the healing modality, who rediscovered a version of the story that allowed her to focus on what she was doing as completely on purpose, not as a work in progress. How would you understand your upset about what's going on as on purpose, rather than something that needed to be fixed, changed, or healed? And I think that the assumption that Trump being in power is an upset is unfair as well. Like, there's that sense of, well, where is the wholeness of the people who are upset that you're upset? That is in power. What about all those people? Do you care about them? Like, there's this grand assumption that all the good people are upset that he's in power. I just wonder about that. I wonder about, what does that say about you? Like, if that's true for you, what does that say about you? What does that say about, what are the assumptions that are attached to that? Like, there's a sense of the spiritual community, or so-called spiritual community, that claims to have compassion, but it's a very selective compassion. It's very selective about who is the victim and who is the perpetrator. It doesn't actually have compassion. Compassion is for everyone involved, and it doesn't see victims and perpetrators. Compassion accepts the wholeness and sacredness of everyone and everything. It doesn't divide the world into greed and exploitation. It attempts to be with everyone's cosmology, everyone's experience, everyone's reality, with the same openness, with the same willingness. And I guess, like all things, if you don't have compassion, or if you have what you would like to label selective compassion, then how is that on purpose? Rather than, making that something that's wrong with you, or something that you haven't figured out yet, or something that stains your spirituality. How could you understand that as already on purpose? How could you understand your lack of compassion as on purpose? And what would it be? So instead of thinking of it as a lack of compassion, what is it? What are you doing? If there is judgment in there, then how is your judgment on purpose? How is your judgment equally sacred to those who are capable of compassion for everyone and everything? And I think you'll get your own sense of what's true, which avenues to go down, or which questions to ask, and how far you want to follow that oneness perspective. How inclusive do you want or need to be, or how inclusive is your purpose? Because it's not a test. It's not like you need to tick all these boxes, or oneness will reject you. It's how can you know yourself in your wholeness, with or without division? Because each of us will find our own sense of what works. So for some of us, wholeness is undivided. So there are no good bits and bad bits. There's no higher self, no ego. It's all present in this one moment. And for others, our wholeness will be in separation. It'll be different aspects. We'll have a personality, and we'll have a soul, and we'll have, our political activism self, and we'll have our parent self, and we'll be able to divide them up and draw lines between them and understand them as different rationales, as different personality types. We'll be able to understand how we operate in those places according to different rule sets. Even the concept of child self, adult self, will, for those of us who divide up our wholeness, will understand those things as separate. And I think for me, the whole concept of being in oneness is about, well, how is what's true for you already on purpose, regardless of what that truth is? So wherever you find yourself when you look in a mirror and you see everything that you are, including the judgment that you have about yourself, I would ask, how is your wholeness sacred? I would ask, how is it already on purpose? And I would keep following that inquiry until you got to a point where you said, no more, I can't handle this anymore. I need to go back to the duality story about reality, because duality is my truth. And often that's what happens is we follow the inquiry until the point where you take responsibility for the fact that it's true, that you are a dualist, that you live in reality, that reality is a dual notion for you. And after that acceptance and responsibility, there's a question of, well, is that okay? And then some people say, no, it's not okay, even though I can see that's where I am and I take responsibility for where I am. I want to make this a journey toward enlightenment. I want to make this a journey toward oneness, where the non-dual becomes my reality. And then you need to go and talk to somebody else, because I can't do that. All I can do is ask the questions that allow you to be present to what's true for you right now. And if I've been asked to talk about Trump and the Oneness Point webinar series, then that's what I do. I don't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know what it's going to mean to you. Only you know what it means to you. And whatever comes up for you, whatever reactions you have, whatever oppositions or agreements you have, are, from my perspective, divine, equally divine. So if I have an experience of opposition, I take responsibility for that experience and I recognize it as intuition. I recognize it as an invitation to be present to my truth, to this moment on purpose, rather than explaining it as a reaction to, or a trigger, or the next phase of my enlightenment, or whatever those other evolutionary stories are. In oneness, the story is present process, wholeness, already active, as if the whole world was just a big bucket of sand and someone keeps shaking it up and rearranging all the bits, but it's still the same big bucket of sand. Didn't get any better. It didn't get any worse. It didn't go anywhere different, except that the whole bucket was having a new experience, because it was constantly being shaken up into a new arrangement of things. And that's really unsatisfying for some people. It's not enough. They want to know that things are getting better. And I think that's the point. Like, the point is that from oneness, all of the realities, all of the stories that are playing out are spirit manifest, are spirit having an experience. So for me, that story that someone has that says that's not enough, we must be getting better, it has to be going somewhere. For me, I can fully honor that, because my cosmology says everything is spirit manifest. Everything is spirit having an experience. So that's included, rather than being in opposition to whatever looks like it's going on in this moment. There's still something about pain. There's something about that sense of, what do I do with that pain? What do I do with that upset? What do I do with that reaction that I have? Even if I attempt to understand it not as a trigger, and I take responsibility for it, and I see the myth of Trump and the myth of presidency, and I see the myth of powerfulness and powerlessness. What do I do with my reaction, with my passion, with my sense of injustice? And in oneness, I guess I would defer to your wisdom. I would defer to your sense of knowing. Because for me, it's about not knowing. But I'm in oneness. So in oneness, the feelings are inseparable from everything else. They're part of spirit's experience. So all of the things that we have labeled and divided into desires and thoughts and actions and conditions of reality, all of the things that we call sickness and health, love and loyalty and betrayal and finances, etc., all of those things are relevant, sacred parts of my now process. So what I would do with reactions, or what I would do with passion, is allow. I would allow them to be what they are. And that includes what we call action. So in the doing without doing, it's not a matter of removing oneself and taking no action. It's about understanding that being and doing are inseparable. So the same way that when you begin to study in separation, the biomechanical system of the body, the biome, with all of its bacteria, can't be separated from the cells. The attrition of birth and death of cells can't be separated from the things we call environment. They can't be separated from the things we label thoughts. They can't be separated from the things we call emotions or hormones or parenting. They can't be separated from anything. Once we truly investigate, even in the art of separation, when we truly investigate, none of those things can be separated out and have a line drawn between them. There's an alchemy. It's all happening at once. So the biome is happening at the same time as the parenting, which is happening at the same time as the politics, which is happening at the same time as the conditions of reality of things that we think of as solid and separate, which of themselves, even if we look at them through the art of separation, are not solid and separate. There are so many ways I can go into this conversation. I mean, it was only a few years ago that the PhD boys discovered quantum phenomena was a lot larger than first thought of, and it can be observed. it's starting to, I wouldn't say change or update the way we think about physics, because I think that physics has never been a set system. It's in a constant state of what we think we know. And then we devise another piece of equipment and we're able to see things that we couldn't see before. And then someone throws in a new theory and we begin to see things that we couldn't see before. It's never been a fixed sphere of something that's true, with all of the things that aren't true outside of it. All of the sciences, all of the humanities, all of the things that we think we know are in a constant state of change. And the certainty that we seek, that feels necessary, for me, is part of spirit's experience. You know, if spirit needs to have or wants or whatever, however that works, to have an experience of certainty or the desire for certainty, then it will have it. And for some of us, it's unnecessary. And again, that's just spirit having the experience of certainty unnecessary. I'm not sure it's about opposing concepts of what is or is not true, or me trying to educate you about the constantly changing uncertainty of all that is. It really is just what I am asked to say out loud. And you won't hear what I'm saying. You will hear what you need to hear, and you will continue to believe what you need to believe, regardless of what comes out of my mouth. And that's just the nature of all that is in oneness. It doesn't take responsibility for a ping pong reality. And if you get all up in arms about that, then I would say that's your truth making itself visible. So go with that. If you need to listen to this in order to have an experience of opposition that allows you to articulate what it is that is true for you, what you believe, then that's just as powerful as finding someone who already knows what you know. Sometimes it's a relief. Sometimes to find someone that is in opposition to your truth, that allows you to articulate what's true for you, is a relief, because at least it's still only you that knows it. You haven't found anyone else who also knows it. And for some people, that's important. It would be a great disappointment to find someone else who believes and trusts all the same things that you do. It would feel like there's no reason for you to be here. And so how can you honor all of the oppositions that you have as a celebration of an affirmation of why you need to be here, or that your uniqueness is on purpose? You know, and sometimes that aggravation is on purpose for its own sake, you know, rather than having this big story around it. The experience of aggravation is sacred, is it not? Just as sacred as any other. I have another message from Miss Becca. Being. The heart is not a pump, but a wave propagator. We are all waving as we go along, some wildly, some wave like the Queen, some wave with their mind, a gentle nod of the noggin. We'll have to get Miss Becker on so that she can tell you her own stories. I guess there's be with your own truth. You know, what would happen if all of your oppositions were an invitation to be with your own truth? What would need to happen for all of your oppositions to be an invitation to be with your own truth? And if only you know, then what are your oppositions in your cosmology? In your own words, without referring to anyone else's wisdom or opposing anyone else's concepts. What are your oppositions? What are their purpose? What are their significance? Where do they fit in the wholeness of all that you are? Thanks, Miss Becker. I'll talk soon.